If you are deck building in the 2004 format, you have to consider Gorebyss. It is one of the most commonly occurring and popular cards. For 2 energy, the Mystic Water attack deals 20 damage, plus 10 more damage for each psychic energy in play. Not just the ones on your side of the field, the ones on your opponent's side of the field as well. You can spread psychic energy amongst your Pokemon in any way you like. As long as they're in play, they are dealing extra damage. Also note that this text does not say basic psychic energy, which means that rainbow energy, double rainbow energy, and multi-energy also count towards this total. Needless to say, Gorebyss can completely flip the table on a Gardevoir deck, and can easily OHKO a Blaziken by hitting for weakness, with one attack giving advantage over 2 of the most popular decks in the 2004 format. It's no wonder that Gorebyss was so popular. But there are a lot of challenges that Gorebyss can't tackle alone. At the end of the day, it is still a Stage 1 Pokemon with only 70 HP, so this Pokemon always needs a partner. Today we're going to be talking about a build that is all about energy efficiency, as well as capitalizing on hitting for weakness as much as possible. This particular style of running Gorebyss is called Jumpy Gorebyss because it is partnered with Jumpluff, a Pokemon that can also hit for heavy damage for low energy, sports a decent Pokebody, and has free retreat. Not to mention, it resists opposing Gorebysses, giving you a bit of advantage in mirror matches. Jumpluff just so happens to hit for weakness on Team Magma's Groudon, Wailord EX, and Team Aqua's Kyogre. When paired with Gorebyss, this gives you a solid matchup against the top 5 decks in the 2004 format. You get the general idea of the build and why it can be so powerful. Let's get into specifics. Starting on the Pokemon side of things, we're going to be looking at 3 Clamperl from Hidden Legends. Clamperl is one of the reasons that this deck is so solid because it has the Exoskeleton Pokebody. Any damage done to Clamperl by attacks is reduced by 10. So any Pokemon that are trying to snipe your basics before you evolve up, this Clamperl is actually going to take 10 less snipe damage. And if your opponent's running some kind of spread deck like Exploud, you're not going to be taking any damage. These Clamperls are pretty safe on your bench. Traditionally, in running this deck, you don't want to evolve up into the Gorebyss until you are already ready to attach that second energy. So a lot of times it's safe to just leave it on the bench anyway. Of course, you will be evolving up into the 3 copies of Gorebyss that are in this deck. We've already spoken a bit about why this card is so good within this metagame. If you look around at a lot of Gorebyss builds, you'll see that most people do not drop below a 4-4 line of Gorebyss. Even if they are running 3 different lines of Stage 1 Pokemon, they always stick with a 4-4 line of Gorebyss just so you are guaranteed that you're going to be able to hit it quick, get it into play, and start firing off those Mystic Water attacks. This build does not use a 4-4 line, as you can see. This build is actually the one piloted by Matt Gillespie at the 2004 World Championship, where he took 22nd place. It's one of the better, more consistent Gorebyss builds seen at that World Championship. As for Gorebyss's partner in this deck, we're going to see a 4-3-4 line of Hoppip. You're going to be utilizing Rare Candy a lot. The only time that's really going to backfire on you is if you get hit with a Technical Machine Rock, and you get kicked from a 70 HP Jumpluff back to your 40 HP Hoppip, which is not pretty, but you can usually see that coming from a mile away. And 3 times out of 4, you're going to have the time to evolve up into Skiploom anyway. The only time you're going to be Rare Candying straight at Jumpluff is if there's an immediate threat in front of you that you need to hit with a grass type attack. And then we'll be rounding out the Pokemon lineup with Dunsparce. You use that strike and run ability, you get your setup super quick, you go grab a Clamperl or 2, you go get a Hoppip, and you're good to go. This deck doesn't need much else than your 2 lines of Pokemon and your Dunsparce to get everything up and running. As for the supporter lineup, we're going to see a pretty typical helping of Draw Power and 3 copies of Copycat, 3 copies of TV Reporter, and 4 copies of Steven's Advice. These 10 cards alone are going to give you most of what you need in your setup that you aren't already getting from the Dunsparce. On top of that, I run 2 copies of Pokemon Nurse just because the energy curve on this deck is so low that you can afford to use Pokemon Nurse, so why not fully heal your Pokemon whenever possible? More often than not, this is going to be your Jumpluff. Your Gorebyss is going to be able to tank a few more hits. Jumpluff is the one that is going to be a little more inconsistent in the amount of damage output it can actually accomplish. So that's where Pokemon Nurse is going to help it hang in there a little longer and keep getting off those attacks. As mentioned earlier, we got the 3 copies of Rare Candy in here, just so you can power straight from Hoppip up into Jumpluff, get that 1 energy attack off super quick, try to catch your opponent off guard while they're setting up. One of the bonuses of having Jumpluff in this deck, aside from the high damage output for only 1 energy, is that it has free retreat, making Warp Point a great utility for the deck, just to get the Gorebyss out of some sticky situations if it has some special conditions attached to it. You can Warp Point it back to the bench, and then retreat that Jumpluff right back to the bench to get Gorebyss in the active spot and attacking again. The 2 copies of Ancient Technical Machine in here are just to get those cheap KOs to knock your opponent's Gardevoir down into a Ralts, their Blaziken down into a Torchic, just making them easier to knock out, especially if you are hitting for weakness. The other tool this deck uses is Crystal Shard. Crystal Shard is a bit of a weird one. As long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, that Pokemon's type is colorless. The entire reason that this deck runs the 1 copy is for matchups against Bellossom, because Bellossom resists water. There's a lot of grass types out there that also resist water, but the big one that this deck gets walled by is Bellossom. And so you would just attach the Crystal Shard to make Gorebyss a normal type, and you're still able to hit for big damage that is not going to get reduced by resistance. And then we do have 3 copies of the standard Desert Ruins. If your deck isn't an EX deck, you're probably running Desert Ruins. If your opponent's running an EX deck, they are probably running Counter Stadiums to get rid of your Desert Ruins, which is why there's 3 copies in here. You got to make sure you hit the Counter Stadium with your own Counter Stadium, which is also just the normal stadium. Only 5 copies of Basic Energy in this deck, and they are all going to be Psychic Energy, just so you can give that bonus to Gorebyss. If you do include Grass Energy in the deck, it makes it a little more inconsistent. It brings down the damage output for Gorebyss, and it's very noticeable. Instead, we have all of these special energy cards that are going to count as Psychic Energy when they're in play when it comes to Gorebyss's attack, but also provide Grass Energy for Jumpluff when it's attacking. So we have 4 copies of Rainbow Energy, 3 copies of Double Rainbow Energy, and 4 copies of Multi Energy. Now, running this many special energy can get you in trouble if you run across these rogue archetypes that target decks that are overly reliant on these special energy cards in order to meet certain energy requirements like Gorebyss. But if this build can hit the top 5 decks in format for weakness and deal consistent big chunks of damage, why isn't it the top deck in format? Well, the answer is because Gorebyss isn't as bulky as a lot of the other big Pokemon, a lot of these stage 2s, a lot of these legendary basics. And if Gorebyss has one off turn, it can get outpaced by these other decks that have bigger Pokemon with higher HP that also have high damage output. And so if the tables turn, they start knocking out your Gorebysses faster than your Gorebysses and Jumpluffs can knock out your opponent's Pokemon. Well, they're just taking 6 prizes faster, and that's how Pokemon is done. And the big issue there mainly lies with Jumpluff, because although Jumpluff is attacking for only 1 energy, the damage isn't consistent because it's dependent on the coin flips. If you don't like the inconsistency of Jumpluff, then Gorebyss has a ton of other variants and partners that you can pick from. There's Lantern, Medicham, Banette. Sometimes people just run the Medicham, Lantern, Banette without the Gorebyss. Sometimes the Gorebyss is just a side chick to Mewtwo EX. The push and pull of Gorebyss decks in the meta game was a little ridiculous, because you would have one build that was meant to counter another Gorebyss build, but then that Gorebyss build would adapt to counter that build, and then things were added and subtracted, teched in and out, until we finally saw these lists at the World Championships that had weathered all of these different matchups. In my opinion, Banette is the real sleeper here. Drop this thing late game and you can sweep. It was also one of the hardest counters you could drop against opposing Gorebyss decks that were just loaded down with Rainbow Energy and Multi Energy. I cannot wait to talk more about this card in future videos. Speaking of future videos, stay tuned to the channel if you want some more vintage Pokemon TCG content. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about this build. Let me know how you would run your Gorebyss. What partners do you think are ideal for the Pokemon, as well as decks you want to see in future videos. I will see all of you when those videos post, but bye for now.